So the dad says, someone among us is an owl. And then I say, who? And then dad narrows his eyes suspiciously.
Why did the golfer bring 2 pairs of pants golfing?
Oh, man. I thought I might be able to logic this one, but go ahead.
In case he got a hole in one.
Why shouldn't you wear glasses when you play football?
I don't know. Because you make a spectacle of it?
Because it's a contact sport.
Oh, that's good. Don't worry, we're not going to do an hour of terrible jokes. Today we're talking about...
We should.
What are we talking about today?
Intermittent fasting. We can probably just get on with it. Before I do that, though, I want to tell you I do love my furniture. My recliner and I go way back. Okay. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. As always, thank you for putting up with it.
I'm looking at our live viewer count, and we just lost everybody.
Well, I was about to say thank you for putting up with our nonsense, which we usually do right at the beginning, but we get on with it. As we've already alluded to, this episode is about intermittent fasting. So we are basically going to dive into everything you need to know about fasting. Is it magical? Some people say there's a ton of, magic to it, and it's the best weight loss method that you can do. And others say it's not really about intermittent fasting. It's about calorie control. So we're going to dive into all of that, and we're going to let you know what you need to know. And hopefully by the end of this, you will know if intermittent fasting is something you'd like to do or not. So with that said, we're just going to dive right into it. Probably starting by the best place to start would be just to do a quick overview of what is intermittent fasting. And it's essentially you pick a window of eating, and outside of that window, you don't eat. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. And there's different ways you can do it. Some people only eat within a 4-hour window. Probably the most popular would be to eat within an 8-hour window and a 16-hour fast. So typically that means you wouldn't eat breakfast. You would just have lunch or dinner. But that's essentially what intermittent fasting means. It's very simple. It's just you don't eat for a while, and then you eat within a certain window. Brad, I don't know about you, but personally, I fast every day for like 8 hours, and then I wake up and eat breakfast. What about you?
That's why they call it breakfast, because you're breaking a fast. But I do think it's kind of interesting and funny that we have basically taken just skipping a meal and given it a scientific name. Yeah. On the other side of that, though, it's also very interesting that we have just decided that there's 3 meals in a day and that's how we should eat. Like, it's just such a weird construct of like the concept of breakfast, lunch, dinner, meals, fasting, eating at certain times a day. Like, it's just all such a weird thing when you actually think about it. And so I think when we talk about like fasting, I think what we should probably really kind of peel the layers back and just talk about like, why would you do it? What are the benefits? And like, what are the concepts underneath it?
Yeah, which one? Let's just tackle kind of those ideas one by one. What do you want to start with?
I mean, I think let's start with just a basic understanding of like the human body and what it means to be fasted. And so if we make it as simple as possible, your body is either in a state of being fed or it's in a state of fasting. And that means either your body is consuming and processing and absorbing nutrients, or your body is in a state of using the nutrients that is consumed previously to function, right? So it's like when you eat, you consume food, you digest it, you absorb it, and then your body takes those nutrients and sends it where it needs to go. And then once it's where it needs to go, your body starts using those nutrients to then just function. And so that's the fed state and that's the fasted state. And they're two very different states of the human body, right? The hormonal profiles are different, the metabolic profiles are different, but they're both normal. Like they're both just part of what it is to be a human and be consuming, metabolizing, utilizing food. And so when we talk about like those things, it's just important to remember that like that's just the cycle, right? That's the cycle that humans go through. That's the cycle that animals go through. And that's just the normal process. And so when we talk about being fed versus being fasted, it has less to do with time and more to do with just the overall status of your body.
So, is it true? I mean, I know the answer to this, but I think we should point it out that in a fasted state, that doesn't mean you're catabolic. That's one of the things that people have made the argument of is if you're trying to build muscle, let's say, the idea that you need to keep your body constantly fed. Otherwise, if you go a long period without eating, let's say 16 hours or whatever, during that 16 hours, you're not anabolic. Where's the truth in there?
It's the net of your body is always in a state of anabolism and catabolism. So build up and breakdown, right? Anabolism is creating bigger things from smaller things. Catabolism is breaking bigger things down into smaller things. And so what matters is like the overall net of the situation, right? So think about like your own personal finances in your house. Like let's say you get paid every 2 weeks, right? The day you get paid, big surplus. The other 13 days, every day's a net negative, right? So kind of the state of being fed and fasted in your body is like, what is the cumulative effect of overall anabolism and overall catabolism? The like acute moment by moment is less important for the overall like outcome than the longer view of what that looks like and what the net is of those two states.
Yeah, where do we think this came from? This whole idea of intermittent fasting as as an actual weight loss practice. I mean, if you look at the not modern, excuse me, if you look at our past, I mean, fasting has roots in like religious practices, medicine, things like that, right? So it's like I don't know exactly when or kind of how it came about as a method for weight loss, but where do we think this came from? And because it seems to me, I mean, I don't recall prior to like probably like 2010. I don't I don't recall it being like a thing, and it could just be because I didn't really pay attention back then to the the whole diet industry. But I feel like this has become a thing in the last 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, I mean, fasting has been a part of human culture for a long time, specifically for religious reasons. But in terms of like weight loss, I mean, why it had a bit of a popular resurgence was more to do with the hormonal milieu or kind of overall status of the body when you're in a fasted state is much different than when you're in a fed state. And so like when you're in a fasted state, insulin levels are low, cortisol levels are higher. When you're in a fed state, insulin levels are higher, cortisol levels are lower. And so there was this concept of like, hey, if we can be in an environment that's less lipogenic, less fat storing, maybe you can actually lose weight faster. Well, it turns out those acute changes in hormones don't really have a meaningful impact on overall body adiposity, right? It's the longer term balance of energy coming in and energy going out. But the initial idea was like, hey, if we can promote this environment more hours of the day, maybe we can accelerate weight loss. And it turns out that's really just not true. But what intermittent fasting or fasting ends up doing is when you restrict feeding windows, you just have less time to eat. And so people generally tend to just consume fewer calories because they skip a meal. And in most situations, people don't replace all of the calories in the meal they skipped in the other two meals they consume. They usually will consume 300, 400, 500 calories a day less. So over weeks or months, they'll lose weight. The second piece of it is like, generally speaking, when people start to practice intermittent fasting, they start to get a little bit better understanding of like hunger and how like, hey, you can wake up hungry, but if you don't eat, it's not an emergency. Like you can probably wait 3 or 4 more hours to eat your first meal and like you'll be okay. And so those are generally speaking, when we talk about fasting, like what ends up driving most of the weight loss.
What about do you think and there's so many myths about this. We can come back to this if we need to, if we don't want to talk about it right now, but there's this idea that there's more to it than just I'm restricting myself from eating during this time. I'm only eating this time. One of those I don't know if you'd call it a myth, but one of those benefits being this idea that fasting triggers cell repair. Right? Have you heard that? Have you heard that whole thing?
Yeah, and that process is known as autophagy.
Autophagy, right. So, and I think that is, from what I understand, it's maybe half true. It's probably overhyped. I think that does happen during fasting, but I think I don't know how much, I don't know what kind of data we have on it. I would imagine it's not, I would imagine it's probably whatever data we have on it is not based on your average 16 8-hour window, schedule. But I would think it would also be the same mechanisms that would cause that would just be calorie restriction in general, right?
So this is like, there's a few things that get misinterpreted about this whole idea of fasting and autophagy and cell repair. And I'll try to walk you through like my main thought processes about it and why I think it's a little overhyped. I don't think it's nothing, but I do think it's a little overhyped. And for a couple of reasons. One, a lot of the times the data that they refer to is generally speaking fasting data in mice. And I would have to go back,
right, yeah.
and I would have to go back and look at the exact conversion, but it's something to the effect of like a day-long fast in a mouse is equivalent to like a week in a human. Like it's probably, it's not quite that. Like I'd have to go look at the exact numbers because I haven't looked at that research in a while, but like it's
not one for one.
You skipping breakfast or skipping lunch and going 16 hours without eating is not quite the same as a mouse going 16 hours without eating. So the biochemical effects are drastically overestimated when you look at animal models.
Well, we have totally different physiology, so that makes sense. I mean, you're not comparing the same species. Yeah.
Yeah. Two, we don't have great data on actual outcomes in humans. So if you look at like, okay, let's say somebody fasts 16 hours a day their entire life and they have 30% more autophagy in their body for 30 years. Do they have lower mortality rates? We don't know. Do they have lower rates of cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative disease, cancer? We don't know. So you're kind of tying an intermediate measure with an outcome way prematurely before we have any data. And then the third piece is if the concept behind the fasting is to promote these things that increase longevity, is it due to time restriction and having periods of fasting, or is it simply due to being in a state of caloric restriction? We don't know those answers. And so the reality is a lot of the claims are probably overstated. And what we have seen in the data to date is it's probably more of the effect of caloric restriction and weight loss is driving most of the benefits than any of the actual specifics around being in a fasted state longer than normal.
So what's the mechanism behind which this takes place? Like, why is it when you restrict calories, whether that's through intermittent fasting or whether that's just I'm just reducing my calories but not changing my eating patterns or frequency, why does this cause autophagy? Like do you know why? Like there must be there's obviously something going on, right? Like is it because cells lack nutrients during fasting so they flip to like survival mode and they just different chemical processes start taking place? It obviously there's something there, but what is that?
Yeah, so I think it's, to make a very crude analogy, it's sort of like, let's assume you were super wealthy and your lawnmower broke. You would just go buy a new lawnmower and throw the other one away, right? if you were super broke and your lawnmower broke, you would just find a way to fix it yourself. And so that's a little bit of the kind of analogy of like your body is when you don't have a lot of nutrients coming in and your cells need to replace parts, they'll just repair them instead of replace them. And so you actually kind of get the body is fairly thrifty, but it also knows it needs to function. So it will repair things that need to be working. Like that's a very crude analogy, and that's not like a one-to-one explanation of exactly how it works from like a biochemical, hormonal, like molecular biology discussion. But like if you think about it in that concept, that's kind of the way it works.
Yeah. So you've done, for anyone who doesn't know about Brad's background, I mean, obviously you're one of, there's only probably a handful of people who have done like the amount of research into diabetes like you have, right? Like, I mean, you obviously, that was a big part of your background, you know a lot about it. But if we, let's jump to this quick, because this is just me being curious. But what sort of effect does this have on diabetics? Because if you're fasting and you're like, these nutrients aren't coming in a fasted state, glucose drops, insulin drops, amino acids drop, your stress signals go up. Is that good or bad for people who are diabetic? Can intermittent fasting have positive impacts on that population?
So let's focus on type 2 specifically, because that's really, I think, what you're asking. Type 1's a very different disease and has different implications. When you think about like intermittent fasting or fasting in general in the context of type 2 diabetes, the energy deficit is going to help improve the intracellular conditions, and it's going to drive acutely improvements in insulin sensitivity and glucose disposal, reduce inflammation, and reduce oxidative stress. When you continue that over an extended period of time, you continue to compound on those benefits. And what is actually happening is that continual energy deficit results in weight loss. And so then you get the like intracellular benefits and then the whole body benefits, right? As you carry less adiposity, you have less intracellular insulin resistance, you get less inflammation, which drives less insulin resistance, etc. So like one of the more interesting lines of research that was done in like the mid 2000s to like early 2010s is there was a big push around inflammation and insulin resistance. And so they used to do a bunch of studies where you can actually, through genetic manipulation, like knock out the receptors in your muscle cells that like receive inflammatory signals. And you can also knock out the proteins that produce inflammatory proteins. And what was pretty interesting is if you take those animals and you engineer them to have like basically almost no inflammatory response, they can gain way more body adiposity and have much lower levels of insulin resistance, which is pretty wild. And so what we started to realize is like this play between intracellular energy status and whole body energy status, a lot of that ends up being mediated through some of these inflammatory signals. And so the less body adiposity you carry, specifically like visceral body adiposity, the lower inflammation you have, which means that's one of the mechanisms by which weight loss drives improvements in insulin signaling.
Yeah, so it's not that the act of intermittent fasting is going to make a difference for you. It's because if you're not actually in a calorie deficit by doing that, it's these little spurts of the way you're eating is not going to make a difference. You're saying it's the overall net effect. If you're consistently in a calorie deficit and you're losing weight, that's what's going to make a difference. And if intermittent fasting helps you get there, great, but it's not the actual window of eating that's going to have any sort of effect on it.
Yes. So let's just say like you take two people, they're both following intermittent fasting. One is in a chronic energy deficit and they're losing weight, and one is not. The person who's not may see a 5 to 10% improvement in metabolic parameters. The person who loses weight may see a 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100% improvement. Like just the orders of magnitude of the benefits from one versus the other, like the context of those is very different.
Right, for sure. Yeah. Okay. So what, I mean, we've told people, we continue to tell people in the group whenever this is brought up, and the question is often, some version of, should I do intermittent fasting, or what do you guys think of intermittent fasting? And our answer is always intermittent fast if you'd like, but you need to make sure that you're still hitting your targets. Like you need to make sure that you're still consuming fewer calories throughout the day than you're burning. That's the only way that's going to, where it's going to make a difference for you. And so it's really more of a tool of calorie control than it is anything else. So, but would you have any advice aside from that for people who are like, I'm thinking about doing it, or, should I try it out? Because to me, the advice is always go for it if you'd like, but you should know why. Like, here's what you need to know about it. Understand this first, and then make a decision. Like, in other words, if you're going to do it because you think it's like it's like it's going to help you more, well, you may be doing it for the wrong reason. So let me tell you what it does first, and then you can decide if you want to do it from there.
Yeah, I think just understanding is it's not carte blanche to do whatever you want. Like you can follow intermittent fasting and you can gain weight. You can follow intermittent fasting, you can lose weight. You can follow intermittent fasting, and you can see no change, right? Like if I were to go from eating what I currently eat, I eat 3 meals a day and sometimes 1, sometimes 2 snacks a day, just depends on the day. If I were to go from like how I'm eating now with the dietary pattern I eat now and move to intermittent fasting and basically not eat from 8 p.m. to noon, which would be 16 hours. If I were to just eat in that 8-hour window, but I went out and I got a 2,000 calorie lunch and a 3,000 calorie dinner, like I'm going to gain weight because that's a departure from my energy status. Now, if I were to just eat what I'm currently eating and skip breakfast, I'm probably going to lose weight. And so it really is, how is this impact your overall dietary like patterns in a given day? I would say that if you're somebody who has a fairly high level of physical activity and or you're an athlete training for something and you want to do intermittent fasting, you have to be relatively smart about when you're fasting. Like if you decide that you are going to eat dinner and skip breakfast every day and you train at 9 in the morning every day and you do super high intensity work for 2 hours, like you're probably leaving a lot of adaptation results on the table because you're going into training fairly fasted and then you're not really getting much nutrients in terms of recovery until, several hours after you're done training. And so I think it's, if you're going to do that, be smart about when you're taking your fasting periods.
I had a thought too. I forgot what I was going to say, but because you touched on something that, I lost my train of thought. Dang it! I was going to ask you a question. You brought up a good point. Maybe it'll pop back into my head. You want to see something interesting that I asked our good AI friend.
Oh God.
Well, no, I mean I do find it interesting. I asked it when we were talking about autophagy. What's the mechanism behind it, and why IF causes it? But I kind of found this answer interesting. Um, when cells when cells sense a lack of nutrients, um, this is sensed through key nutrient sensors. Low glucose slash amino acids activates AMPK. I don't know if that sounds. I don't know what that is, but low insulin slash growth signals inhibits mTOR. Remind me again what mTOR is.
mTOR, mammalian target of rapamycin.
So what is this saying? This is like it inhibits
mTOR. Yeah. Your body has signals to tell you when it's low on nutrients. right?
Yeah.
And so what happens when those things are turned on is it's like, oh, I need to conserve things so I don't use stuff that I don't have, right? So AMPK is interesting in that it is basically a energy sensor in your body that tells you when I'm low on intracellular X, I need to go absorb more or I need to make more, right? It's actually the target. It's one of the targets of metformin. So metformin is effectively an AMPK activator. So what that does, generally speaking, when your body is utilizing the phosphocreatine system and glucose, your cells start to accumulate AMP. So you have ATP, right, adenosine triphosphate.
Mhm.
When you use that, you get ADP, adenosine diphosphate, so an adenosine with two phosphates. You have a reaction in your body called the myokinase reaction, which it takes two ADPs. So you have ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate. So you have two molecules with two. They get combined together, so you get ATP and a MP, which is adenosine monophosphate. So as you start to run low on nutrients to create energy, the byproducts build up. And so those signal your body to go absorb more glucose and fatty acids, right?
Gotcha.
So what metformin does is it basically tells your cells like, hey, you're low on stuff when you're not. So you actually start absorbing more stuff from circulation. Now, mTOR is related to energy status, and that is one of the key regulators of muscle growth.
Okay. So does this mean like if you had more mTOR, you would potentially grow more muscle?
If you inhibit mTOR.
If you inhibit it, excuse me. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Interesting. Very interesting. The other part of this says so after that, formation of I'm gonna butcher this word.
When you mTOR signals muscle protein growth. When you inhibit it, you reduce muscle growth.
Okay. Oh, so when you inhibit it, you reduce muscle growth.
Yeah. So what's really interesting is, this is so far off topic, but it's really wild. I want you to pull up, go Google search Bully Whippets myostatin. Do you see a picture of these dogs?
Yes. Holy crap.
Okay, share your screen and show these pictures.
This is a beastie dog.
There's a couple animals in which they have genetically and spontaneously had effectively congenital genetic changes where they don't have they have a genetic mutation to myostatin.
This is crazy. Look at that dog.
And so these dogs have overdeveloped muscles. And it's like you can see the dogs. You click on that top left picture. There's a normal one, and then there's one with a genetic mutation.
Yeah.
And you can see the difference when you have genetic regulation of muscle control and no muscle control.
I don't believe this at all. I think these dogs got that way from intermittent fasting because I think it made them super anabolic.
Yeah. So what's
interesting?
So what the specific genetic condition in these dogs, and I hope I don't butcher this because it's been so long since I've looked at this. We produce a protein called myostatin. Myostatin inhibits mTOR, which is related to muscle growth. So these dogs don't produce myostatin. So they basically have like just out of control muscle growth. There's also cows that have this condition. You can look up myostatin knockout cows and you can see what they look like.
Oh my god. Oh my god. It looks like a
Yeah.
Hold on, I'll share my screen.
So what was really wild is when I was at Washington State University, I did a bunch of work in collaboration with their labs for my doctorate. They actually had myostatin knockout mice, so I got to see these super jacked mice in person. It was pretty crazy. But
See if I can
so
find a picture
your
of
body has
those.
all these nutrient sensors, and fasting basically simulates some of these things. So it kind of tells your cells
Yeah,
how much energy is available.
that's crazy. Do you ever miss that kind of work?
I miss being able to go into the lab every day and just put my headphones in and do work
And do
and
things?
just get stuff done and not like just do emails and meetings. I really enjoyed being able to like work for weeks or months at a time on a project and like have a result at the end, which is really fun.
Yeah, that's
I,
cool.
I don't miss
So
the grant writing and the politics and all that stuff.
sure, the red tape behind it. Yeah. Um, did you do back to intermittent fasting? But did you do any like studies on whether it was mice or whatever you might have worked with? Like, was fasting ever part of the research you did?
No,
Okay, just was no reason to.
no, we were just focused on much different things.
Gotcha. Okay. Um, what do we know about the way it affects brain function? Like, because I know in some people, I will probably I don't and I actually don't I don't remember exactly what this stands for, but I remember reading that for some people, fasting increases something called BDNF. I'd have to look up what it stands for.
Uh,
Apparently, it's
brain
like
derived. I think it's brain derived neurotropic factor.
okay. So apparently
Yeah.
that can help with memory or learning or cognition or whatever. I don't know if that's true or not, but there's also the counter argument that you know it increases cortisol, and we think of cortisol as like the bad hormone because it makes us more anxious, or we don't feel as good or whatever, like we just feel more stressed. So like there's kind of both of these things, but are there any, to your knowledge, is there any have there been studies that show neurocognitive benefits to fasting?
So I think I want to answer this in two layers. To to address the first point about like neurotransmitters, or like proteins and stuff that affect the brain.
Mhm.
One of the really difficult things to do is try to ascribe a larger physiological response to a single like marker, right? So, for example, sure, BDNF may go up from fasting, and BDNF may be associated with enhanced cognitive function, but exercise also enhances BDNF, right? We know
Sure.
cortisol is bad for memory and brain function, but fasting also increases cortisol. So there's always like, if you were to take like a panel of all these things and you were to say, hey, how does fasting affect all these things? There may be 20 that improve, quote unquote, improve brain function, and 20 that potentially could negate brain, like improvements in brain function. So whenever you boil it down to like single neurotransmitters or things, it just gets really messy. And so you kind of have to ask the question is, in the aggregate, how do these things affect the actual outcome? So like
Yeah.
cognitive function,
Right.
cognitive tasks, etc.
Right.
I haven't spent a ton of time looking at the literature, but I think here's how I would say that. I think anecdotally, people do report clarity of thinking when they utilize fasting.
And I always wonder
How
if that's placebo. Like that's what I don't, you
That's
know.
the question, right? Is
Yeah.
it because you're fasting and there's some magical property about, going 12, 16 hours without eating? Or is it maybe you're just not distracted by a bunch of stuff?
Hmm.
Is it placebo?
Right.
Is it, maybe the context in which you're living your day because you're fasted? Like, it's just really hard to tease that out.
Right. For
But what I
sure.
would say is, like, in terms of overall cognitive function, being in calorie balance or not carrying a excess amount of body weight is probably beneficial. Managing your food intake so you're not riding like huge changes in energy, glucose, etc., is probably beneficial. Um, and fasting may provide some additional benefits, but we don't really know for sure exactly what the mechanism behind it is for most people. And there's like various reports.
This makes me
want to ask the neighborhood friendly chat GPT.
Well, I want to, yeah, because I actually want to ask it. This is something that popped into my head. So I said, what are some interesting things about fasting that people wouldn't normally know? So this is what it
That I think
says.
the longest documented case of somebody fasting was like 400 days or something.
Jesus, really? I did
Yeah.
not think you. Holy cow! While you're looking that up, I'll tell you what it said.
382 days.
Do we know if this person was severely like?
He
Was this
lost
an overweight person?
276 pounds.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say they must have been
from June 14th, 1965 to June 30th, 1966.
Holy crap, dude!
And he never experienced low blood sugar. That's crazy.
Random fact for you. Well, I'll see if you know. Don't look it up. Do you know what the record is for longest time without sleeping?
So I think it's like 7 days, and I think the guy died.
Nope. He actually lived. He was completely fine. It was no, shoot, now I can't remember if it was 13 or 14. It was like 2 weeks. Hold on.
He probably
Longest.
experienced like a psychotic break.
Yeah. Oh, I'm wrong. 18 days, 21 hours, 40 minutes. Yeah, a guy, Robert McDonald from California in 1986. And yeah, it was like I remember reading about it, and it was like he was hallucinating by the end. Like it was bad. Anyways, let me read you a couple things about intermittent fasting. So this is what our AI friend came up with. Um, your gut has to adapt, and it might be noisy. When you first start fasting, your gut motility and hunger hormones get thrown off. Um, it may reshape your gut microbiome. Animal studies show that fasting can alter the gut microbiome in ways that may reduce inflammation and improve metabolic markers. Some bacteria actually thrive in a fasted gut, helping with insulin sensitivity and fat oxidation. That's kind of interesting. I don't think we know a whole lot about the microbiome, but I think
Yeah, I mean, I
that's
think here's the hard part when you look at fasting data and fat oxidation. When you have low levels of carbohydrates coming in and low levels of calories coming in, insulin levels stay low. So your body has to utilize fatty acids to
everything else.
provide more
Right. Yeah.
energy.
Right.
Now, some of that comes from intramuscular triglycerides, some of that comes from body adiposity, but that doesn't mean you're losing body fat at a faster rate than if you were just eating the same calorie deficit normally.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense to me. It doesn't give these nuances like that, but here's a couple more. There's only a handful, but I found this interesting. It might enhance chemotherapy in mice. It says there's a parentheses there. It says
Yeah,
there's
I mean,
early. Yeah,
this is
go
where
ahead.
things start to get really off the rails.
Like in terms of like how much truth there is to this.
How much truth there is, and then the other side of it is, do you know what the largest complication for people with cancer undergoing chemotherapy for extended periods of time is?
I mean, I would say getting sick with
It's
other
it's
diseases.
cachexia. It's not getting enough
Oh,
nutrients, right? So if you tell
just
people who are
okay.
already struggling to get enough nutrients to like help their body respond to these treatments, and then you're telling them to eat
Hmm.
less food, it becomes like almost negligent advice. And so you have to be really
Mm.
careful about those things need to be coming specifically from a doctor who have very
Yeah,
good experience in that field.
there's two more here I'll read to you real quick. Fasting may help with age-related diseases, but it's not proven yet. It says in animal models, intermittent fasting is linked to reduced risk of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and cardiovascular disease. Human trials are underway, but it's still in the early days. That's kind of interesting. I wonder what that'll show. And then it says the kind of the last one here. Women respond very differently than men. Research suggests women may experience menstrual disruptions, mood issues, or thyroid changes when fasting aggressively. That's I hadn't considered that. It's interesting, huh? But I'm particularly interested to see about age-related diseases. Do you think? What
Yeah,
do you
I
think
mean,
the outcome? If you had to guess, what would you say? What do you think the outcome of the human trials would be? Do you think we'll have anything tangible or anything that we can conclusively say? Or do you think it'll still be muddy?
I think I think it's not going to matter because
Yeah.
here's my conjecture. What are the things that we know are going to help people live longer and have a higher quality of life longer as you go
Right.
into your 50s,
It's
60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, hundreds? You need to
yeah. Some things.
carry and maintain a higher level of muscle mass, a higher level of
Hmm.
bone mass, a higher level of cardiovascular fitness, a higher level of
Hmm.
mobility, and you need to engage in cognitively challenging and emotionally challenging things on a regular basis.
Hmm.
Fasting to like slow aging through whatever protein restriction, whatever, flies counter to all of those big things. How do you build and maintain muscle mass and
Yeah.
hold
Right.
on to it through like your 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s? It's a
Yeah.
moderate to high protein diet and resistance training.
Right.
How do you ensure that you have enough energy on board to stay physically active? It's not being in a calorie deficit your whole life,
Right.
right? So I think this concept of like, hey, let's practice X restriction to slow metabolic rate to slow metabolic aging, I think actually flies counterintuitive to what we know actually drives longevity in most people. So I
So,
think it's going to end up not mattering.
what would you say is the overall takeaway from this episode that people should know? To me, this is. I'll tell you what I think. You'll probably have a more nuanced answer, but if I were to simplify it, it's really just it's what I had said earlier, and that is intermittent fasting is some sort of magic bullet for anything. If you want to do it because it helps you mentally, because it helps you control your calories, or you just enjoy it, go for it. But I would say don't do it if you think that there's some inherently, special property about it, because at the end of the day, you still need to exercise regularly. You should weight train. You should, if you're trying to lose weight, you need to be in a calorie deficit. So you still need to hit your calories. You still need to be on track with your macro targets if you're tracking your macros. And at that point, intermittent fasting becomes a tool to help you manage those things. It kind of fits into your lifestyle everywhere else. That's what I would say the main takeaway is. What would you say?
I think that's a totally reasonable main takeaway.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and I like I said, I straight up tell people in the group, listen, I'm not trying to discourage you to do it. Like go ahead if you want to, but like here's what you should know. Now if you want to still do it, go ahead. But I think sometimes people subject themselves to these things that they end up not enjoying, and it's like, well, you didn't have to do that actually, So, um,
This is
but that's
true.
humans. That's humans for you. Is there anything you'd like to add? Any other thoughts you have about intermittent fasting? Is there anything we haven't covered you think we should mention?
Nope. Do you have any other random questions?
Related to
I don't know. What do you got for me?
this? Mm, how excited are you about the potential for that we found a Goldilocks
Potentially habitable
zone?
planet?
Yes, the Goldilocks zone.
Now,
I think that's pretty promising. Is there any has there been any update on that? Do we know?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But, and I will tell you I'll give you my bias up front. I want nothing more out of my entire life than to be alive
Fun
when they
life.
announce extraterrestrial life.
For sure,
Like,
dude. I'm
if
I'm
we
right
ever
there with
have
you.
the ability to upload our brains into computers, it's not because I want to live forever. I just want to live long enough to know that aliens are real. Like, that's really all I care about.
I would love to hear that news too. Since we're talking about random things and since you brought it up, I actually think we could pivot off that idea. And the have you ever discussed or thought about I've had this conversation with Jay, is that if we were to find like intelligent alien life, like capable of space travel, you know what I think is most likely that you'd find? I think it would be AI. Because I think in order to traverse the distances and the time needed to get from one place to another in space, I don't see how a biological body could do it. So like I feel like if you were going to encounter some sort of intelligent species, it seems likely that it would be AI. Don't you think? It's like
There's,
like if you're going to upload your consciousness to a computer, you become quote unquote inevitable. You're immortal. Like if we get to that point, then you can travel wherever because your consciousness is just it exists forever. So to me, that seems likely. What do you think?
I have no idea. I just hope
I
that whatever the reality is, we're probably going to determine that it's like bacterial life, or it probably won't
Yeah,
look like
it's
life on Earth, but it'll be like some very simple organism. That's probably what it's going to be. My bigger question is going to be, how will the world react? Like, how does
yeah,
everybody's perception of themselves and our planet
right.
and everything
Hmm.
change?
Yeah.
That's what I'm excited for. Also, then all of my like fantasies that I had as a kid of like all the books I read about like aliens and stuff could be true.
Now
That's what I
confirmed.
really care about.
Just
And
last night,
Fox Mulder will be vindicated.
yes.
That's the
So
most
will
important thing.
yeah, so will Travis Walton. Do you remember that? Did you ever hear about that story? Travis Walton, the guy that they made a movie about him called Fire in the Sky,
Yeah, I
where
was gonna
he's
say,
got
pretty sure that's the fire in the sky guy.
yeah, yeah. I saw a meme just last night that said we are all just like it was like what's the meaning of life? Like what is all this? And it was this picture of a Sims game and it said we're all just a Sims game in God's overheating computer. I'm like,
Did you ever read Stephen King's, I think it's Under the Dome or whatever?
no,
You should read that book.
what's it about?
You have to read it.
Give me a synopsis.
These people live in a town, and all of a sudden they wake up one day and there's just like a giant dome, like
Oh,
a force
okay.
field dome over their little town.
That sounds like the Truman Show.
Kind of, but way cooler. So ipso facto, you should go read it.
I know the Truman Show was pretty good though.
In fact, you are not
Um,
allowed to do anything else today except for go read that book.
hey, if you say so. All right, that's what I'm gonna do. Hey, sorry, Brad, I didn't get any work done on Wednesday because you told me to go read this book.
We'll get to
No,
our meeting next week, and people are like, Dylan, why is your stuff not done? Brad told me to read
yeah,
this book, and I'll be like,
uh,
yes, he gets a
exactly.
pass.
You'd be like, yeah, well, just doing what he said.
It's a great
I don't
book.
have
It's
any.
really interesting.
I don't have any other random questions, but I do think we should wrap this episode up with the. I just want to say that you have not been vindicated on your pyramid theory, the structures underneath the pyramid. So you isn't it like that story just sort of disappeared. If there was truth to that, there'd be more to it, but there's not. Sorry, dude. Sorry to burst your bubble. I wanted to believe that there were things under the pyramid too, and that aliens built them, but they didn't,
I think you're just a
and there aren't.
hater. That's what I think.
All right. Well, people have listened to our ramblings for long enough, so I need to go eat something because I have been fasting. I have not eaten a single thing today. That's actually true. Have you had anything to eat yet?
I had some oatmeal this morning.
I have not had anything, and I'm getting
I'm
pretty hungry
basically
at this
like an
point.
old man at this point. I just eat oatmeal.
So when I come out there in July, I'm gonna bring you some Jello.
Oh, I hate Jello.
Well,
Ugh,
if you're old, you got to get used to it.
I hate Jello.
Do you remember when Nabisco made the? Do you remember when Nabisco made cookies and cream Oreos? There was
No,
like somebody, yeah, they made a cookies and cream flavored Oreo, and someone was like, "Well, we've come full circle for sure." I don't know. My buddy just randomly texted me this, but yeah, it's literally like they made cookies and cream flavored Oreos. Like, Isn't that what Oreos are?
yeah. I mean,
Like,
you
why
make
would
a
you need
good
to make
point. Like, I think
right? That's what I'm.
if you go buy a cookies and cream Blizzard from Dairy Queen, don't they basically just put Oreos in it? Isn't it like
That's
it's the
what it is.
same as
Yeah,
an Oreos Blizzard?
yeah. Yeah, and it might be like a knockoff version of Oreos, but like it is the same thing. Yeah, that's exactly right. So, all right. Well, we're gonna end this and get out of here, and hopefully get some work done today. So, appreciate y'all. Till next time.
Toodles.
Goodbye.